Hey everybody, welcome back to James Draws Everything, drawing every country in the world's flag. One more day down, one more episode, and today we're going to be doing a big one. All right, one I've been kind of hyping up for a little bit here, for a minute or two. We're going to be going into Europe, and we're basically doing Europe today. James, you're going to be doing the EU? I thought you said you were only doing countries. No. We're doing kind of like the proto EU here. We're going to be doing the country of Austria. All right. So I've been talking a lot about the Hapsburg Empire in a lot of my episodes because it basically kind of ties into almost every country in Europe, and there's really no better country to discuss the Hapsburgs, because you have to talk about them, right? No better country to do that than the country of Austria. All right, so you're going to be getting some bonus content. Don't worry. I know it's been a minute or two, but this is a very, very simple flag. And there's a ton of stuff to talk about here. So let's just get right down to it. So very early on, this is home to kind of like some early Celtic people, like pre-Roman Empire. When the Romans come in, that kind of introduces Christianity to this part of the world. And, as the Romans decline, Germanic peoples kind of start becoming more of a thing in this part of Europe, right? So like kind of like that old... the barbarians at the gates, right? The Germanic peoples were much more primitive than the Romans, but as history progresses, it's often the barbarians that create the new stuff, right? So as the old ways die out, their culture becomes the dominant culture. So Germanic peoples start coming in. Austria, to this day, you could pretty much consider them like a Germanic people. And yeah, so you already have like early kingdoms in like Italy, France, Spain at this point in time. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, he conquers this area in 788 and further develops Christianity there. And you're still kind of seeing like a bit of a split between the various like the Orthodox and like the Roman Catholicism. And there's also like a burgeoning Turkish empire, right, with the Ottomans kind of rising to power kind of around this time. And as those Turkish people are trying to expand into Europe, this is kind of where the Hapsburgs, they make their debut, right? So the first Hapsburg king is Rudolph, not the reindeer, just King Rudolph. And the Hapsburgs, it's widely believed that they originated in Switzerland. And King Rudolph is Rudolph I. He's kind of largely credited for kind of driving out that Turkish influence in this part of the world in Central Europe. And so that's basically the start of his dynasty, right, of the Habsburg dynasty, which rules for pretty much 600 years, right? And when you think of, when they show classical Europe, like in the movies with, castles and all that, you're pretty much thinking of Habsburg Europe. So 14th, 15th century, the Habsburgs start to expand their influence to other regions in Europe. And it's a little bit different because a lot of, peoples before that, it was by right of conquest. but the Hapsburgs, they expanded their influence by marriage, right? So they were kind of like early sort of diplomats, I guess you could call them that. And this kind of causes some problems, right? So if you're familiar with European history, you'll know that a lot of these monarchs, kings, queens, princes, they were all related. And if you're trying to keep your bloodline going, you can go a little too far with that. There's really no polite way to put this, but yeah, there was a lot of inbreeding. All right, so, and we'll get to more of that, and as we talk about this further. But yeah, to kind of keep the to keep the Habsburg lineage pure, there was a lot of intermarriage and things like that between these states. So the Austrian Hapsburg Empire, again, it kind of I wouldn't say it ushered in like an age of peace, but it was a different Europe, right? So, and it was all kind of loosely tied into this Austrian kingdom here, and it wasn't really like done like how the Romans did it. Again, a lot of these Habsburg provinces, or whatever you want to call them, they kind of had their own autonomy, and it was, again, sort of like kind of like what I alluded to earlier, kind of like a very early version of like the EU, right? So it was kind of like a proto-European Union, by Habsburg blood. So this kind of stretches into France, into Spain, into Poland, into Portugal, even into the New World, right? There was if you want to go watch my Mexico episode, I talk about, this is much later on, this is in the 19th century, there was actually a Habsburg in Mexico, right? It expands into Latin America, Central and South America. So this was a very wide-reaching dynasty. And again, even kind of going into the New World. So the Ottomans also are kind of expanding at this point in time, and they're expanding into Hungary, right? So there's a bit of a war between Austria and Hungary, and there's also some issues that kind of start arising once you have the rise of Protestantism, right? So the Habsburgs are sort of like the last ties to like the Holy Roman Empire, right? Because they're very Christian, Catholic too. Or Catholic if you want to be more specific about it. So, when Martin Luther, makes his big statement, and, the rise of Lutherans, Protestants, this causes a lot of trouble within the Habsburg kind of dominions, and they want to kind of squash all of this rebel rousing, right, that all these Protestants are kind of starting and heating up, and even that kind of continues to this day. Protestants and Catholics, for the most part, get along. It's not really a big thing anymore, but if you want to think back to like the Troubles in Ireland, which kind of went through like the 1990s, that was very much kind of a legacy of this, right? So you have a very strong sort of a Catholic hand that kind of runs the ship, and then you have like these separation of church and state types that are more Protestant, Lutheran, that are fighting against that, and that kind of spreads into like the English Civil War, that spreads into people leaving Britain for America to start what becomes the United States. So this is a very, very wide-reaching sort of I wouldn't really just call it just a conflict. That's oversimplifying, but hey, we're only going to be doing this in a 10-20 minute episode. We're going to be oversimplifying a lot here. This is 600 years of history that we're talking about, so we got to cut to the chase a little bit. And I'm already done with the flag. Jeez, I'm not even I'm barely into the 19th century, and we're already done. But again, don't worry. I I got some stuff here that's going to keep us busy. So what was I talking about? Yeah. Again, if I go too far off track, just give me a little elbow in the side or something, because yeah, there's so many different things to talk about here, so many different influences and everything that, you know, not just the ancient world but the modern, it's all influenced by this Hapsburg dynasty. So again, they're starting to kind of lose a little bit of power with sort of the rise of Protestantism. And not just that, just kind of framing these conflicts as Catholic versus Protestant is grossly oversimplifying things, because you're also seeing industrialization, right? So you're seeing almost overnight a complete and total change in just the way that society thinks and functions. So you get a lot of, kind of revolutionary new ideas, republicanism, even, extreme ideas like anarchism, which kind of comes into play, at the end of the 19th century going into the 20th. So you get a lot of anti-monarchical sort of attitudes that kind of put Austria on the ropes. So as far as that, you sort of see like the rise of like Germany, during that point in time. Poland is getting separated between like the Germanic states and Russia. There's a lot of kind of strife leading up into the the 19th, 20th century. But just kind of to speak about this place in general, Austria was a cultural sort of capital of the world. Like even to this day, a lot of great architecture, medicine, science, music, literature, all comes from this place in the world. And you can still kind of see that. They do preserve their history fairly well in Austria. They still have a lot of, those old castles and landmarks and beautiful artwork and all of that. So speaking of the rise of some of these, kind of revolutionary ideas, can't really talk about that without talking about the French Revolution. So the French Revolution, right, was probably the most radical up to that point, right? Maybe even more radical than like, what Martin Luther was doing, a couple centuries earlier. So, they deposed the monarchy. Napoleon comes to power after the revolution. Austria did not want to see an unstable France, so they went to war. And, Napoleon basically goes to war with all of Europe. And, again, before this, there was also, there was the 30 Years' War, which was sort of like kind of a war between, the Catholic monarchies and like these new ideas, Protestantism, republicanism. So it kind of creates like a new way of looking at how Europe is conducted. Like the Peace of Westphalia was done as like kind of a result of that, which kind of ties into this. Kind of looking at these nation states as opposed to like kind of kingdoms or whatever. But even that's kind of oversimplifying, because the nation state doesn't really become a thing until about 100 years after that. But still, kind of sets the seeds for what's to come. So 1848, you have a bunch of revolutions as well, kind of like Marxist revolutions, right? Like rights to the workers and the people, democracy and all of that. So you're starting to see a lot of chinks in the armor, right, of Europe. So it's kind of the old Europe is sort of falling apart, and Austria is kind of at the right at the center of that. And part of 1848, part of those revolutions, you have a Hungarian Revolution, and when that's kind of put down, you have like the beginnings of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right, under Franz Joseph. So they kind of unify almost because they're both sort of pushed into a corner, right? So they're trying to preserve like the old Europe. And that empire includes a whole slew of different groups, Germans, Hungarians, Croats, Czechs, Poles, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Ukraine, even some Italians. So they kind of they kind of keep things going for as long as they can, right? Just kind of struggling to keep the lights on. But a big part of what I talked about before, is like with all the intermarriage and stuff, you get a lot of monarchs that are not really mentally fit to run things, and so yeah, that kind of becomes a problem too. And more and more nationalist movements kind of start uprising, like going into the 20th century. And I'm skipping through a lot here, but early 20th century, you have a lot of nationalist uprisings, namely in like Serbia. That's an important one, and you get a lot of unification sort of attitudes rising between like German and Austrian peoples, because they're kind of ethnically the same people. So you see Germany and Austria form very close ties during this point in time. And a Serbian nationalist, doesn't want to be under Austrian rule. He's got a bit of a kind of anarchist tendencies. Gabriel Princip, he shoots the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, and that kicks off World War I, right? So that's pretty much the final nail in the coffin for Europe. So there is still a Europe today, but it's not the same, right? It's a much different thing. It's not like what it was for centuries. So you have a completely different power dynamic now. So after World War I, of course, World War II, Nazi Germany, they annex Austria. The Allies, win World War II. So Austria's status is kind of up in the air. It's kind of administered by like a few different parties. And that actually kind of stays that way until 1955. So they're no longer occupied, and Austria is recognized as an independent state. They're forbidden to have any kind of ties with Germany, and they have to declare neutrality with the Soviet Union, right? So that they can't be like a communist state. And of course, communism in Europe, it's like a totally separate topic, and we've talked about that a whole bunch of times. Doesn't really tie into Austria as much, but it's worth mentioning. But since then, though, Austria's rebounded quite well. They joined the European Union in 1995. They still haven't joined NATO. They're kind of like an ancillary member, but they're kind of pledged neutrality, so they sort of stay out of those things. But yeah, again, still a cultural capital of the world. And before I try to think, do I want to get into the flag first or the bonus? Yeah, we'll get into the flag. So this is one of the oldest flags in the world, right? This red, white, red, and it's very similar to that Latvia flag, if you can see that in the upper corner there. And legend has it that in 1191, after a fierce battle in the Third Crusade, right? So one of the Crusades, Austria was involved in a lot of that. Duke Leopold V of Austria, he was wearing a white tunic, and it became completely blood splattered. And then when he removed his belt, you just saw the white underneath where the blood hadn't hit it, and then the blood was around the white, right? So think about it like if any of you guys paint out there, if you ever use like your blue painter's tape, right? And you splash a bunch of red paint, or hey, maybe blood, and then you peel the blue tape off. That's kind of what this flag is meant to mean. So very old flag. Austria is still trying to kind of keep a tradition alive. And I mentioned it's kind of a public service announcement, I guess. The dangers of inbreeding, brought to you by James Ross Everything. It's, they kept things in the family, the Hapsburgs, a lot of the time, and it did result in some problems. So this guy, Charles II, he was a Hapsburg, but he was of the Spanish Empire, right? But we can talk about him here because, right, Austria basically was Europe, right, the Hapsburgs, so all this stuff is connected, literally and figuratively. And he was one of the more egregious examples of the Hapsburgs keeping it in the family, so to speak. So if you ever heard of the Hapsburg jaw, it's kind of scientifically proven that when you marry your cousins and all that, it can result in some physical deformities and problems. And apparently he had this so bad that he had difficulty eating, right? Because his jaw was so misshapen and wired oddly. And he was the king of Spain. And when he died, he had no successor. He was married, but he was always kind of seen as like he was called Charles the Bewitched, right? So it was always sort of seen as like a joke that this guy's he was like the Joe Biden of his day, I guess. But he was it was always joked that like his wife was still a virgin. Whether that's the case or not, I think there's been a lot of scientific study on his remains and stuff since then, and he probably couldn't reproduce, right? He was probably sterile. They said that like when he died, like his head was full of water. He only had one testicle. He only had one kidney. He may have had like how do I put this to where I don't want to get kicked off YouTube? His his genitalia was possibly unclear, which would have been very odd by this time frame's sort of standards. So when he dies, that kind of throws Spain into a big crisis, right? Because he had no successor, right? So you have other people that were, kind of playing into this, saying that, oh, well, we're the successors, and you have Burgundy people, and I believe it was like French, and what would become sort of Belgium. So that kind of becomes like a secession crisis, right? Where this guy left no clear heir to his throne, and that kind of threw another sort of nail in the coffin of old Europe, right? Because you have all these sort of incompetent rulers that just mentally were not, quite frankly, just not to try to sugarcoat things, but he was definitely like mentally retarded and couldn't administer a state, right? Let alone sire and heir. And so one of the there's pros and cons to everything, right? So that's one of the cons of monarchy, right? If you're doing it this way, you have these people that it's set in stone who's going to be like the king or whatever, and that can work, but it might not, right? Because what if the guy is like Charles, right? Where he's it's kind of a miracle he even survived past like his 5th birthday or something, with all the physical limitations and problems that he had. And mortality rate was pretty high back then because of things like this, like with these peoples. Whatever. It's not his fault, right? He can't control how you're born. But yeah, and when this stuff is kind of competing with all like the new ideas that are coming in with like industrialization in the modern world, when you're running your monarchies like this, you're not helping your arguments, right? So you definitely give ideas like Protestantism, republicanism, democracy, like those ideas definitely sound a lot better, right, when this is what they're competing against. But not to be completely negative here, because I think the Hapsburgs, you got to give them credit for ruling Europe, right? Like for a very long period of time, for centuries. Not to say there weren't problems, but one of the arguments for monarchy is that you can almost make a private property argument for it, right? So when you're the monarch and you're giving it to your son or whoever, right, some family member, it's almost like an inheritance, right? You want to give them something good, so it's in your best interest to keep the state running and afloat. Whereas with like whatever you want to call what we have now, this sort of a bastardized version of democracy and basically just corporatism and managerialism, there's no incentive whatsoever to keep things good, right? Because you always have to run, right? If you're running for elections and stuff, you always have to make sure that there's problems, right? Because you have to run on fixing problems, and there's also a lot of corruption because, of course, you're going to enrich yourself, right, at everyone else's expense, where monarchies don't tend to do that, right? So there's pros and cons to both. But yeah, that's Charles II of Spain, right? Not a candidate for prom king, but an important figure in history. And I figured, with this episode with Austria, I know he was the king of Spain, but he's basically Austrian, right? He's a Hapsburg, so we'll count that as our bonus content for Austria, because again, it is a simple flag, but there it is. And I think it's you don't really think of Austria as like the seat of European power today, right? You probably think of like France, Britain, Germany, and then to a lesser extent Spain. But Austria, when you look at the nuts and bolts of things, the historical context, yeah, it is definitely one of the most important places in European history. And again, it basically was Europe for the longest time. So with that said, I know there was a lot to cover there, not a lot to draw, but I hope you liked the bonus content and my little public service announcement. So again, guys, do not inbreed. So with that, don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next video.